Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Hamcation webinar for Contesting 2.0. Our presenter this afternoon is Brian Moran, N9ADG. And a couple of ground rules for you before we get started here. If you've done these other webinars, you know that we're under unique time constraints. So we have a hard stop at 12:54. If you have a question, please make use of the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the presentation, but we're mostly going to be handling them at the end of the session. And this stream is going to be appearing on YouTube, which will be available after the Hamcation is over, and you can find links to that on the hamcation.com website. And with that out of the way, I'm going to hand things over to Brian. Take it away.
Thanks, Sean. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Moran. I'm N9ADG. I'm the current editor of the ARRL Contest Update. You can get the ARRL Contest Update by being an ARRL member and signing up on the webpage. And you can also see old versions or previous versions of the contest update by going to ARRL.org/contest-update issues. So that's a way to see the contest update and what I do every month. I've been on a few DXpeditions. I try to do contesting mostly with groups in teams with some friends, and that's how I stay involved. What I'd like to do is take you through today what I'm calling Contesting 2.0. And what that's about is kind of the aspirational outlook of what contesting is going to be in the future. So let me start the slide presentation. And as Sean pointed out, if you put your questions in the area that you is designated for that, we'll either answer them as we go along or maybe at the end. I just want to make sure, can everyone see the screen? Sean, can you confirm that?
Yes, I can see your screen fine.
Excellent, great. So we'll launch right in. Today we're going to talk about some trends that we are seeing in contesting, and and then talk about technology, some of the techniques and some of the changes that are going on with some of the sponsors, and then hints on how you can sort of future-proof yourself for being ready for whatever the next thing is in contesting. Now, in putting this presentation together, I talked with a lot of people. I talked with the current and past editors of NCJ. I talked with some well-known contesters. I talked with the folks who are at the pinnacle of some of the contesting clubs, and I tried to elicit their opinions on where they thought contesting was going. I even spoke with people who are responsible for putting together the results articles for various contests to get an idea both for HF and VHF and UHF contests where things were going. And this is what the results of some of that work, and maybe some things that we can draw from that to understand how things are changing. So to be very inclusive, I'd like to point out that, contesting 2.0 is an aspirational kind of outlook. There's always a new 2.0. If you get to the next contesting stuff, well, it's not the next one anymore. There's always a new 2.0 in the future. So the same kind of contest we have today evolved is going to be part of what contesting 2.0 is about, but you're also going to see some completely new contests coming out. And you see that, kind of in an innocuous, like, well, let's just do this contest the first time and see how it goes. And then all of a sudden it becomes popular and off you go, you have a new kind of contest. For our purposes in the discussion in this presentation is we're really going to concentrate on those traditional HF and VHF and UHF contests. And you would say, well, what do you mean by non-traditional ones? Well, we already have a bunch of different kinds of contests or events that involve amateur radio and are kind of viewed as competitive. You have the whole on the air movement with, parks on the air, national parks on the air, Texas parks on the air, Walmart parking lots on the air. All sorts of things are on the air, islands on the air. And the one I kind of like is the summits on the air one, as an example of this, kind of on the air activity, where you have people that are doing something and you have the other people that are working and chasing after those people. Now, summits on the air is kind of interesting because it involves physical exertion. It involves climbing hills. And in this part of the country, I'm located near Seattle. It involves sometimes climbing some very large peaks. It could be technical climbs or they could be just walk-ups. And there's quite a following of this kind of activity, and it's getting bigger. And what's kind of unique about it is it's not your traditional view, or not the traditional demographic for amateurs that are doing this kind of stuff. It's more the younger folks, which is great, and they're doing an activity and bringing along ham radio. And I would invite you, if you're at all interested, to take a look at what some of the people here in the Northwest are doing, what the folks in the Rockies are doing. And there are some hills on the East Coast as well that people activate for this kind of activity. So there are other kind of activity using amateur radio, but maybe in a one-way fashion, are high altitude balloon flights. And if you want some more information on this particular topic, I'd suggest looking at the May 2017 issue of QST, where a person who is very versed in this aspect of competitive use of radio with high altitude balloons talks about some of the experiences over his helping out with 500 of these flights. There's a very dedicated community, again, brings in non-traditional amateur populations in the form of science students, students in general, younger folks who are interested not just in the use of amateur radio, but really to accomplish the goal of sending a balloon around the world, perhaps multiple times, sending back information on altitude, humidity, temperature, and sometimes even pictures. And there's a very dedicated infrastructure for supporting this. And I invite you to just take a look at some of the pictures of what these people are doing. It's great. Again, involving amateur radio, not traditional contesting, but yet competitive. Then there's also the amateur radio direction finding folks who are combining the sport of orienteering, which is navigating to different points with maps and compasses, along with radios. And what these folks do are use handheld radios and antennas to race from one checkpoint to another to find the transmitter. And again, you see a much different population active in these kinds of activities than you do a traditional HF and VHF and UHF. I would invite you to take a look at the ARDF websites to kind of get a feel for it. And if you like going for hikes in the woods and bringing a radio with you, this is another way of doing so. So that we already have those different contests. If I have omitted yours, your favorite non-traditional activity, let me know and potentially talk about it in the future. So for HF and VHF, UHF contesting, let's talk about some trends. Some overall trends first, and then we'll talk about some ones that are specific to the higher frequencies. First of all, in a broad survey of people who are in the know and have seen the results of their user bases in contesting clubs or opinions for surveying a population, shorter contest durations seem to have more and more preference over time. With the way things are nowadays, people don't want to spend the entire weekend contesting in general. The dedicated contesters do. However, shorter contest durations seem to be more the norm, where there are other activities that need to be accomplished during the weekend, and the weekend can't be dedicated entirely to contesting. Also, there seems to be a preference for more immediate contest results. For the younger demographic, it seems a little quaint sometimes that it might take months for the results of a contest to be known. And that has driven change for some of the traditional contest sponsors to get the results out sooner. And we're going to talk about a little bit in the future about in a few minutes about how that's influencing different contests. And so that's a demand. With the advent of being able to upload logs, do computer scoring, it's not only possible to score logs immediately after the end of contests, but as we'll see, it is also possible, and we just need to have more contests do this, to kind of score logs almost continuously. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Information aids can yield higher rates for contesters. We see more and more people aware of the ability to use things like call sign databases, super check databases, and information wherever it comes from for propagation, for band openings, to obtain more QSOs and do it faster than ever before. So what contesting is becoming more about is information management and making continuous decisions on the information coming in, reflecting the nature of the contest itself. We also see people turning away from the traditional contest sources of information. In the past, it was books and paper publications, and it's now shifted online to the online versions of books and paper publications, but even more importantly, social media outlets where people are tweeting their contest participation, or live streaming what they are doing during a contest, or participating in email discussions where they're revealing some of their techniques and maybe their thoughts on strategy for the next one. So the traditional sources of the distilled contest information have become more diffuse, and so it pays to pay attention to some of the newer sources of this information. Remote operating used to be controversial, difficult, but you're seeing more and more that it's a built-in feature for new radios. I think there are very few radios, mainline radios from the traditional manufacturers that don't have remote capability. They're all just designed to be remotable. And we're also finding in these years of COVID, and like right now, for hamfests and conventions too, remote seems to be not only accepted, but expected, that people are thinking that how remote can play more for their advantage. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Also, when people talk about contesting, there are different populations with different aims. There are dedicated contesters who are going to be there weekend after weekend. They plan and arrange their lives around certain of their activities that they're their favorites. Whereas other folks are like, well, what's on the radio this weekend, and who are we going? What kind of contacts can we make? And so they are variously lumped into populations: casual versus dedicated, and very dedicated. And the differences between those populations may be widening in some ways that we'll talk about in a few minutes, but it mainly involves convenience, time on the air, and usability in a lot of ways. And which brings us to the trend that user interfaces now and the design of ham gear, the ergonomics, and basically the way gear looks really seems to matter, as well as how easy it is to use. Performance is up there, that's important, but for certain populations, just like for any other consumer preference, there are different preferences for purchase or use of amateur gear, and preferences for contests depending on the features of the contest, if you will, that kind of factor into how popular and what kinds of folks are involved in those activities. So those are trends we see on the macro sense for all contests. Now, in particular for VHF and UHF contesting, we see that there's an overall participation is up mostly on 6 meters in the last year or so. And that's attributed to not only the COVID bump, which everyone's experiencing all across the ham bands and the FT modes, but it's mostly on 6 meters because people are opportunistically taking advantage of the 6 meter band setting that happens to be on most mainline rigs manufactured in the last few years. So they're using the 50 megahertz or 6 meter band on the rig they have to get those cues. Another trend in the VHF and UHF contesting world is that there are reduced numbers of multi-operator operations. And this started before the advent of the FT mode. So you can't blame this on the FT modes. And it's been variously attributed, but not confirmed, to kind of be because of the aging demographics of some of the really big gun VHF and UHF stations. Don't know exactly, but there just seems to be a reduction. And then again, this started before the FT modes came into favor. I mentioned the 6 meter capability. You just get that by default. That's actually been a great win for 6 meter contesting. But maybe a negative kind of trend in general is that when there are casual ops on 6 meters, many times they just stick to the FT modes, and they do so even when CW or phone is open, and they can make contacts faster using those modes. And I'm not sure if this has been really explored to understand some of the reasons. I think there are a lot of suspicions, potentially mic fright, or maybe they're doing something else while they're doing contesting. Maybe they don't want to take on the extra load of tuning because in general, it's almost a channelized kind of operation using the FT modes. Don't know. I think that would be interesting to explore at a greater detail. Another trend for the VHF and UHF contesting folks is that there are fewer stations that are going up in frequency beyond 222 megahertz or 440. Beyond there, it becomes kind of rarefied, and fewer stations have that capability. A positive trend, talking about the SOTA kinds of operations, summits on the air, is that those activators are having an impact when they are occurring during VHF and UHF contests. Traditionally, VHF and UHF contests favor stations located in high locations. Well, the SOTA activators are being encouraged to get on during those weekends to make those contacts from those high places. But key is that despite perhaps negative feelings by some contesters about some of these impacts, the serious contesters, they're going to make those contacts no matter what. They've been using FM they've been using sideband, they've been using CW to make those cues. They will continue to use meteor scatter and probably take advantage of some of the really interesting new modes and capabilities, like the enhanced use of rain scatter for making contacts. So they're going to continue to use all those modes to make those contacts and get the biggest scores possible. There are just a lot more choices now. So let's talk about how contests are changing. The traditional ones that we're doing today are changing, and talk about some of the impacts that, or some of the techniques that might favor you or in operating in some of these contests, no matter what your level of seriousness is. We'll talk about technology changes. I'm going to talk about some operating techniques changes, and some changes that seem to be taking place on the contest level and the sponsorship level themselves. So, in general, every time I hear something about such and such is going to kill ham radio as we know it, I think, that might be a pretty interesting technology. How can we use it for good and not evil? In the past, there are all sorts of things that were going to be the death knell of amateur radio or contesting in particular, such as CW keyers. Well, heck, sideband was going to be the death knell of ham radio a long time ago. Computer logging, spotting networks, skimmers, SONR, remote operation, those have been bad, allegedly bad, but we're still here. The internet itself is killing off everything, not just contesting and radio. Lack of sunspots. At one time, pack roving was a good thing for some and bad for others. And heck, let's kick no code licensing some more, but we've survived all of those things. So you can add whichever ones you'd like to the list. Now, there are some threats or challenges that I think that we still need to think about. And one that we're not going to beat collectively is that the number of departures from our hobby and ham radio due to our aging demographics much exceed the number of arrivals into our hobby. And so everyone talks about this issue. What we're going to do, it's not just specific to contesting in general, it's specific to a lot of different types of hobbies. Again, consumer preferences change, times change, trends change. Don't see much to arrest this other than thinking about how some of those activities that do involve younger demographics, maybe some of those different kinds of contesting I mentioned previously, we can learn from what's appealing to those populations and do some things to make contesting have that kind of appeal. Perhaps an insidious challenge or threat is the continuing noise floor rise due to poor electronic devices. Switching power supplies that are poorly shielded, all manner of devices that don't meet the unintentional radiator specifications that are put in place to prevent this kind of thing. Those are making the use of our radio gear in suburban and urban and even now rural locations more difficult. Someone can bring a cell phone and its charger to a remote site and raise the noise floor a few dB just by plugging that in. There on some multi-operator in some multi-operator stations, people's personal electronic devices are quarantined during contest weekend precisely to avoid issues like this. So that increase in RFI everywhere is going to continuously be a challenge to our hobby. Also, the favoring and the popularity of the FT modes by casual contesters, where that's all they do, if we don't have a way for the analog modes, if you will, of CW and phone to accommodate the preferences of those operators, then we may be at reduced capabilities to make contacts with those operators and get those points. For serious contest operations, casual operators really matter. They're the folks that make this whole thing work. And if we lose that population or it's much reduced, it's going to be a lot less fun for everyone. So that's another challenge. If you have preferences, or sorry, if you have opinions on what you think are the challenges, I'd love to hear about them. And you can reach me at contestupdate@arrl.org, or you can look on qrz.com under my call sign N9ADG. I'd love your opinions on that as well. So let's talk about a couple of technology changes that you should be aware of that are becoming more ubiquitous and would give you some advantages. One of which I'm going to talk about that's been around for a while and many people do know about it, but some people maybe are reluctant to try it, and that is the usage of spectrum displays, whether it's with the instantaneous displays of spectral information, but perhaps more importantly, using a spectrum waterfall augmented by the actual spot information. Now, this is a way to look at the spectrum that you're receiving on a band and quickly see signals that are going in both an instantaneous way and also over time. So you can look over an interval of a few seconds to see if someone's CQing. If you augment this with spotting information, then you can see whether or not stations are at a particular location in your band map that can be worked for credit, or whether they're dupes. And you can even see, if you're looking for, say, a place to CQ yourself, whether or not someone has been using that frequency and whether it might be clear or not. So there are some really quick advantages for using a Spectrum or Spectrum Waterfall. And you can find that it's built into some loggers now, where you can take information out of your radio, or you can get a fairly low-cost device, which is an SDR receiver, and use it along with the radio you have to put this information right in a window, say an N1MM. So on the right-hand side here is a picture of the Spectrum monitor using an RSP1 SDR receiver with N1MM, where spot information automatically annotates the band in real time, and you can watch that. So you can see other stations moving in as you're using it. You can look at bands opening and closing by the signal levels on some rigs that support it. You can click to tune on spots, say with your second VFO. So while you're running on one frequency, you see someone pop up and get spotted, you can click on that spot and go right to that frequency. Or you can see someone start up on the frequency without being spotted, and they might be a mult. You could go quickly listen to that in another ear to work them. Key in having high rates and making a lot of cues is being able to get to those spots more quickly than your competitors. Bob, N6TV, has been touting the advantages of using Spectrum displays for a number of years now. And his quote is, "If you're not using a waterfall display in a contest, you're really operating blind." And so he's adamant about this that he's prepared an entire presentation on it, which you can view online on contestuniversity.com's website. Look under files and look for the 2019 presentation by Bob, N6TV, about Spectrum waterfall displays and how to set those up. And again, if you're using N1MM logger and you have the appropriate hardware, which isn't expensive now, you can be able to get this going in probably a few hours and get familiar with it. So that's a pretty interesting operating thing that you should be aware of. You should use this information to inform your contesting if you are serious about it. Another big change happens to be in the use of the FT modes. It really matters more when you're in a contest and that mode is allowed in addition to phone and CW or RTTY. The reasons is because you'll find a lot of casual operators using these FT modes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a great way to see if a band is open. If you only can listen, just spin up to where the FT mode frequencies are on 10 or 15 meters, and if you hear signals there, chances are the band is open and you can try those other modes. There are a lot of people on all the time. Now, the benefit of this for the casual contesters and everyone is it can make contacts when other modes are just can't. It's kind of the equivalent of adding an amplifier or some really good antennas, or sometimes both, and it really makes some locations that are not good for radio acceptable to be able to make contacts. Also, don't underestimate the fatigue factor. If you're a casual operator, you don't want to be trying to pull signals out of phone or phone signals out of a lot of interference. If you're in a suburb and your neighbor has a lot of interference, it can be fatiguing. I know I was talking to my wife about this, who's an amateur radio operator as well, not very active, but she does not appreciate listening to static. She does not appreciate pulling signals out of a lot of noise. It's just not worth it for her. So she doesn't necessarily mind reading contact information off of a screen and acting on that because it's not as fatiguing. It's still not clear for the contests that allow both CW and phone modes along with the FT modes. It's not really clear how to best use it in a combined way. And I think that's evolving because of the way that people are operating. It really hasn't settled down yet, and you really you're going to see this kind of tension, if you will, in some of the VHF and UHF contests where any mode can be used to make a contact. The ARRL RTTY contest allows the use of RTTY and other digital modes, and has for years, many years before the FT modes came along. Field Day added the capability to use FT modes, and so did the software allow the correct exchanges to be made in the last couple of years. And QSO parties themselves have been modifying their rules to allow the use of the FT mode software which might not accommodate their traditional exchange, but they understand they want to have the people to participate in their QSO parties and make contacts. So they've changed their rules to accommodate the casual mode contesters. So it shows you maybe a trend that may be happening in the future. There are some benefits that have accrued to the overall amateur population, even if you don't like the FT modes or think it's not a good thing. It has raised their awareness and knowledge of grid squares to the overall ham population, and the software itself is capable of better kinds of signal reports, more impartial or true signal reports. And if we use distance-based scoring for multiplier purposes using grid square and distance-based, it's potentially a fair multiplier kind of scoring situation than the traditional geographic ones, which favor very specific places for operating from. So it's maybe an opportunity to get other parts of the world involved, and even other parts of the US involved, where you don't have to have a waterfront in Maine to have the best opportunity to make contacts in any particular contest. It helps, but if you're using grid squares and distance-based, it's maybe a little bit more fair. Now, it's not a favorite of rate junkies. You're because these are cyclical contesting modes, have a very defined transmitting interval. There is a theoretical maximum rate you're going to get on an hourly basis, and it's when the bands are open for CW and phone, it's very easy to beat any of those rates. So you should use phone and CW when you can. So it just shows that there really is attention for knowing whether or not use FT modes for maybe multipliers you wouldn't normally get, or switch to phone and CW to get rates. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Another technology change that people are talking about and not understanding yet how best to use or the impact is our real-time scoreboards. That's where during a contest, as you are operating, your score is posted to a public place so that you can look at your progress versus other people operating in your same operating category. In this picture here, I have a picture of the Contest Online Scoreboard, which is one of the contest scoreboards that exist. And this one is for the North American Sprint Contest, which was held earlier in February. And what happens is, as you're operating along at periodic intervals, your score and sometimes your band breakdown and what mode you're operating in is reported to this website, and you can see, if you care to, where you fall in among your other reporting peers. It's motivating to some operators, but it seems to be intimidating to others, where they don't, for the folks that it's intimidating for, perhaps it's the pressure of knowing that someone is creeping up on your rate can act as something that stresses people out, whereas other contesters are more motivated by knowing that their nemesis from across the state is creeping up on their score. Also, we're getting used to usage and how it might impact, the information available. Does it provide too much information on what your competitor is doing? It is possible to get band breakdowns on some contests, and that might actually qualify as assistance if you knew that there were cues being made on 10 or 15 meters without you going there. Would that tell you, would that be enough to tell you to go there? You can certainly know which of your competitors are on, and if they're reporting, and know what their scores are, and that might serve to get you to stay in the chair a little longer. You might see that they are making contacts on a band that you're not on, so it could inform your band changing strategy. So again, this is one of those newer things that really hasn't settled out yet, but you should be paying attention to, because more and more people are using it. Logging programs are making it much easier to use this, and I would hope that in the future it might actually be able that you would have to opt out to report your scores rather than opt in. with a few little changes, seems like it should be possible to do that. But even more importantly, getting folks used to the fact that information can be reported to a centralized place or places during a contest is really a stepping stone to maybe doing instant online scoring of contests, where in the future, two stations make contacts, they each independently report their contacts to a scoring server, it gets matched, and that score is then used as the official. So you are continuously scoring the contest over time, continuously checking the logs over time for making sure that people have the scores that they have. So that could get us closer to that capability in the future. Another technology you should be aware of is the use of automation and control through computers of all the gear that you might have associated with your radios. So it's great that radios now have remote capability built in, but there's all of the ancillary equipment that you need to control. Amplifiers, potentially tuners, potentially bandpass filters, potentially antenna switches, rotators for sure, and you need a way to do this from your computer for a number of reasons. And that is that, first of all, as you're running along, you don't really want to have a focus on a piece of equipment over here, an antenna switch over there. You really want to be focused on what's happening in your brain, in decoding what people are sending to you, typing the call signs of stations that you're logging, and controlling the various aspects of your station by using the computer. Logging programs have had the capability to turn rotators, switch antennas, and switching bandpass filters automatically for a number of years now, but now everything else is coming online. And this can improve the operator focus and reduce operator error, especially in the wee hours when getting on 40 meters automatically does all the magic to get the 40-meter antenna in line. Maybe if you have two of them, get the right stack in line. Maybe as you're typing in someone's call and it's in a different area, you have to rotate the antenna. You type in the call, hit the rotate button and to bring the signal up, and everything happens automatically without taking focus off of the primary task of logging more contacts. There's a new technology called Node-RED, new mostly to the ham folks, which already supports a wide variety of ham gear and is supported by a very active population that allows you to aggregate different pieces of information about what you have in your shack and hook it up into dashboards that allow you to monitor and control it. I encourage you to visit the Node-RED Groups IO group, where you find people like Dave, WO2X, hanging out and helping folks automate various aspects of their station. Here's an example of a dashboard that Dave uses where he's got an Elecraft KPA 1500 amplifier where he's able to monitor everything that's important, such as SWR, what the temperature of the radio and the output power, along with his Flex radio. Flexes have some of these interfaces built in, but pretty much any gear with a network interface or even serial interfaces can be used with this Node-RED technology. He's got an Antenna Genius 2x8 antenna switch, which is something from the 4 Oscar 3 Alpha and Flex Radio folks. And he's got a rotator. I don't know what he's got, probably a Green Heron controller where he can use an azimuth display or tune by into fixed buttons into certain areas, or tune by dragging and clicking and dragging the footprint of where he wants the antenna to point. That's a way of doing that as well. It also can control a lot of other things he has in his shack by just on and off switch closures. So Node-RED is something that you should be looking into if you want to be able to automate what you are doing and provide this information on your desktop or your contesting glass cockpit. So to get it out of manual control and turn it into automatic control. The way it's used is actually kind of interesting. The hardware can be various and sundry things that you might find in your amateur radio station. There are different things called flows attached on top of this hardware. And once you have these two pieces in Node-RED, then the user interface where you can not only monitor but control it shows up as dashboard items that you can then integrate. Again, I invite you to take a look. This kind of software runs on things like Raspberry Pis. So I would expect that there might be in the future certain kinds of gear that have this support already built in for it in the actual unit to make it easier. Also, by having it all on a desktop, it makes it a lot easier to use this using a remote desktop or your phone, which you can look at, say, a web page. This is all rendered as web pages. Makes it easier for you to control this information from anywhere. Which brings us to another trend, which is take advantage of remote. As much as you can. You should try to remote everything for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can find greater utility by being able to use your station from other places in your house, or even your cell phone. You can display your desktop and operate your transceiver right from your portable device. Why would you do this? Well, if you're a DX hunter outside of a contest, you can work that rare one when you happen to be shopping or waiting in the parking lot for something. Another opportunity is that you can share your station with other people that might not be as advantaged a place as you are. If you have a means to escape your urban or suburban RFI by putting equipment somewhere, well, you're going to need to be able to remote not just the radio, but also all the control infrastructure. So any work you do to handle the and manifest the control of your station through a glass cockpit can only help you when you do this remoting. And remoting actually provides benefits beyond those that you would think just to have something far away. So remote everything is important. Don't underestimate the utility of that, and as we go further in the future. So some technology changes that you should be taking advantage of that I talked to some people, they're like, oh, I wasn't aware that worked like that. Just in case you missed it, logging programs nowadays, you should take advantage of everything you're allowed in your operating class. We'll talk about why there's some changes there in a few minutes, but if you are allowed in your operating class, and most people are, to use databases like SuperCheck Partial or call histories, you should absolutely take advantage of that. You should take advantage of station automation features in your logging program to potentially move frequency up or down or turn rotators. And also, for most contests nowadays, unless you're in a geographic location, which totally trumps everything else, you might want to look into SO2R, because that's really the way to get into the top spots in the results for single operator categories in most contests. There are some technique changes. I mentioned that information in management really needs are driving contest actions, and you should take advantage of those capabilities if you have them for call histories using your logger. You should also take a look at some of the operating technique changes that are occurring because of something called two-band synchronized interleaved QSOs, which is kind of pioneered by CT1BOH. I'd invite you to take a look at that. It's basically a way to run on two bands at the same time. You're always calling CQ and you're always working stations. It's a little off-putting because you don't hear your own transmitted signal, but boy, you're busy working stations. Again, that's kind of where the bar is nowadays for high-end single operation. You can also take a look at what some of the multis are doing and try to translate those advanced techniques into what you're doing as a single op, and that would be listening through your transmitters on the same band. You can do that with some of the modern radios today with the filtering and protection circuits built in. You should absolutely take advantage of any logger features that you have for stacking calls during runs so that you don't have to be soliciting for contacts. They are coming to you and you're able to work them as quickly as possible. And again, take a look at maybe some of the intelligence that you can gather from online scoreboards during the tests, because that's an evolving area. Some of the remote opportunities are challenged by noise issues. You should take advantage of that. If you don't have a room for 160-meter antennas where you're located, maybe you could go in with some folks and put a 160-meter station somewhere where you can operate it effectively. You should also take advantage of some of the newer information sources that are available. 3830 Scores has been available for years, but continues to be the place to go for contesting anecdotes. You can take a look at contesting logs and analyze them to your benefit using public domain tools to find band openings, find out what your competitors are doing that you're not, to get more contacts. You should definitely read NCJ and also the contest-oriented columns in CQ magazine and QSD, of course. You should probably want to subscribe to the CQ contest mailing list. You could consider reading Reddit, the amateur radio group there, but you have to have a high tolerance for, well, practically everything. There's a lot of noise in that group. There are also, for VHF and UHF operators, places you can coordinate operation and hang out. On Slack, there's VHF chat, and there's certainly the ON4 KST chat rooms for traditional web browsers. There are Ping Jockey and other websites that can advantage you during contests. If you have your preferences, send them to me. I'd love to know about them. You can also search for SO2R, SO3R, or any other contesting topic on YouTube, and you can screen by date to find the more recent ones. That's something fun to do. It's great to find any particular topic on YouTube. Videos now are in the fore for instructional usage. Now let's talk about really quickly some contest and sponsor changes. CQ has eliminated pretty much the single op non-assisted category. It's been condensed into single op, non-assisted or assisted, single op. That's just the way it is. You could probably expect other contests to do that same kind of thing in the future. I don't know of any, but you should take a look at that trend. There have been some trends because of COVID, such as distributed multi-classes. It would be nice if those stuck around because what this allows are people to operate their own stations in a multi-multi situation, coordinating through a VPN or what have you, sort of like IARU stations have done in the IARU contests every July. That gives people an opportunity to get the taste of working on a team, working as a multi, but using their own station. It's also an opportunity to potentially mentor people. And I don't know if it's here to stay after COVID diminishes. Perhaps it is. CQ Magazine used to have an extreme category that allowed this for the CQ Worldwide a few years ago. Again, maybe it'll stay. I mentioned shorter contest durations. Well, there's also weekday contesting. A lot of contests are occurring during the weekdays. RSGB had a big series of them, and you'll see the K1 USN slow speed tests. You see CW Ops during the week. A lot of these are very popular, and you might want to take advantage of some of those. Those I think might evolve into more major contests in the future. More equitable multiplier opportunities with grid squares. We're already seeing that for the FT mode contests, but perhaps we'll see that for more of the traditional modes, where faster scoring is moving towards instantaneous scoring in the future. Some of the magazine publishing deadlines for the traditional contest sponsors have been pulled in to provide results faster, but if you're running contests on a more frequent basis, you can't have more contests before the results of the previous one are published. So you're seeing that all kind of condense. And with today's technology and the internet and the ability to communicate, anyone can start, promote, and score their own contests. I think there's been a real renaissance in QSO parties because it's easier and faster to do these things than ever before. You even see the the State QSO Party Challenge, which is kind of a meta contest on top of all the QSO parties. So people are taking advantage of that for starting new contests. So the new contests we're seeing are lower stakes in general, where they happen more frequently, they're of shorter duration, and they're promoted via the internet and with fast results. And some of them are even mandating the usage of scoreboards, like the North American Collegiate Challenge, and they're not constrained by magazine publishing deadlines, like the Worldwide DigiDX contest, which is sponsored by the Worldwide Radio Operators Foundation and the Slovenia Contest Club. That one went from 0 to 1,300 participants in this first year and has been growing since. So that gives you an idea of a newer contest that's become very popular. What can you do to future-proof yourself? Stay up to date with your software. You should always read your release notes, especially every Tuesday when N1MM Logger, if that's the one you use, comes out. You should definitely take advantage of the new releases of FT Mode software and read those release notes, always good information. You should always use everything that you're allowed to for your entry class and try to keep up with some of the other information sources. It takes a long time, but it can be worth it if you want to be on the cutting edge. Small changes that I think could help everyone would be to have logging programs ask the operator to submit the actual log for someone at the end of the contest. Logging programs already have internet connectivity, no reason why they can't do it. So maybe also for extra bonus points, post a summary to 3830 scores. So people don't have to type all that information in, it just goes. It's about convenience. You want to get the casual operators to progress and get more involved in the contesting population, make it as easy as possible. The schism that exists between traditional CW and phone contests and FT modes when they're both allowed in the same contest could potentially be fixed a little bit by allowing per mode QSO points when FT is an alternative mode. So give the FT mode operators incentive to work phone and CW, as well as give the phone and CW operators the incentive to work the FT8 the FT4 and FT8 operators to make sure that those points count. And FT mode software, you've only seen a few years of this so far. So it's only been contesting capable for a couple of years. I think we're going to see an easier way to insert messages to move stations to other bands. I would hope we would see this. An easier way to set up your own kind of sequencing so that if you are announcing operations on other bands, you can insert that free text into your messages more easily than you can today. And here's one that would seem counter to the goals of the FT mode software, but would help the operator, and that would be in the middle of using FT mode, if all of the reports are coming in with a high enough signal to noise ratio, prompt those operators that they might want to try phone and CW for extra points, depending on the contest. So, it's like, hey, stop using FT mode, go use CW and phone because you can get a higher rate and higher scores. Where it's all about helping the operator, there's no reason why that software couldn't do that. So let's take a look at a couple of crazy things that could happen. You could imagine in the future that on the cutting edge, someone could set up a skimmer or a spectral capture unit to get a whole band of spectrum, channelize and auto-tune it, feed the individual conversations over to the cloud, and use either humans or machine learning to decode that and actually do a sideband skimmer. That could happen. You're already seeing multiple receivers used to beamform for optimizing reception of marginal signals, and more in a DX case, but if you can do it automatically using maybe some cheaper SDRs that are synchronized, that would be kind of interesting. And then rather than analyzing logs by hand or pouring through log analyzer programs, using machine learning of these public logs to actually provide band change guidance, multiplier guidance, maybe band and opening guidance. That would be kind of interesting as well. So I have some thanks to a number of people that informed some of the information in this presentation. My slides will be up at the bit.ly location located here. And I invite you to look at contest update issues as you would like to. And I have basically 2 minutes for questions.
Yeah. Hey, Brian. Yeah, we do have, actually, we pretty much out of time, I'm afraid. Yeah. So what's that email address that people could reach you at again?
Contest-update at arrl.org, or you can look on qrz.com for my call sign N9ADG and send me email personally.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for your time today. It was a very enjoyable presentation. And just a quick reminder to everybody, this session will be available on YouTube after the event is over, and you can find the links on the Hamcation website. So again, thank you everybody for attending, and thanks, Brian, for your time today. And
Thank you, Sean.